Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Welcome, magical ones. How are we all? We have another super exciting show for you today, our top 10% global Secret Witch show. I always love to say that. So many secret witches out there listening and hiding away. And we've got an amazing guest here to share the absolute loving potency and magic of sister circles, which is a topic dear to my heart. And it's timely because the doors to our Secret Witch membership, our Secret Witches Apothecary, are about to open. Sisterhood has been such an important part of my own healing journey, and more than I could ever really have expected when I was absolutely fearing being in sisterhood, fearing other women. The thought of joining a circle at one point left me in overwhelm, anxiety, which often surprises people. And yet stepping in at my own pace, softly, tenderly, like even just sitting in the background until I felt ready, has been so healing for me, both in the journey of healing myself and also in the journey of becoming a healer. And my whole philosophy really is grounded in the idea that people are remedies, and that as we heal ourselves, we also become healers. And sisterhood is really one of the ways that I hold space for that journey. Even if you just want to come in and soak it all in from the background, there's absolutely no pressure to interact. So if you're keen to join us, not only do we have a juicy episode for you today with Gemma, but you can also find our membership at nicolebarton.co.uk/membership and register your interest, because it's coming soon. And we also have a free event coming for you to get a taster too. On The Secret Witch show today, though, our guest is Gemma Brady. Gemma is the founder of Sister Stories, which is on a mission to make going to women's circles as common as yoga class. She's dedicated her life to creating spaces for people to tell important stories. Beginning her career as an award-winning filmmaker, she believes in the healing power of storytelling and created Sister Stories as a means of offering women an opportunity to come together and experience the transformative power of being seen and heard. In this episode, both Gemma and I explore the transformative power of sister circles and how our personal stories facilitate healing both for ourselves and others, exploring the understandable fears associated with stepping into spaces of sisterhood, like vulnerability and the witch-ridden fear of persecution, and the importance of fostering unconditional love, honouring our triggers, and having the courage to share our voices and even to listen. We illuminate the vital need for sisterhood in the permission-giving reclamation of our authentic expression, and how that's medicine for the world, including the mainstream. Let's dive in. Welcome, gorgeous Gemma. We actually met years ago, I think it was pre-COVID, at Restfest, where we were both holding circles, I believe. And I've kind of followed your journey through social media since then, loving everything about what you do. And sisterhood is kind of so baked into my own path. We were talking just before we press record about how I view people as remedies for each other, and how sisterhood is such a powerful space to be able to claim our gifts from that. So I can't wait to dive into this topic around sisterhood and healing sister circles with you particularly, because I know this is like your work and your passion. So thank you so much for being here, and welcome.
Thank you. It's a complete pleasure to be here. I really appreciate you asking me.
Oh no, I'm so excited for this. And so as I always kind of tend to start, kind of the premise of my work is that people are remedies, as I said. So what I often tend to do is invite guests to share their own kind of journey into, particularly into harnessing the power of sister circles. So if that feels good, we can start there.
Yes. It's a big question, and I'll try and be succinct. So my path to creating sister stories and working with sister circles is a bit of an unconventional one. So when I was growing up, I had no idea about circle. I wasn't connected to the healing arts in any way, but I always had a real interest in stories, in the power of stories, both in consuming them and reading them and kind of losing yourself in them, but also what they could do for us individually and collectively. So, you know, I was a bookworm, and then I went to study literature at university. And then when I left that, I went to go and become a documentary filmmaker. And in that career, I did lots of things within my career there, but towards the end of it in particular, I developed a real sort of specialism in holding space for really quite challenging stories to be told. So stories of trauma, stories of people in liminal space, stories of people at the edge of life or at a personal edge, which required, you know, as the director or the producer or the person asking the questions, depending on what role I was doing, it took a lot of sensitivity to hold that space. And so my role there was to be a listener, and I loved it because I'm not really one of life's talkers. I'm one of can't say it even. I'm one of life's listeners, and I've learned to be able to talk and share my voice. But actually, the position that I'm most comfortable in is as a listener. And so, in my documentary work, I was creating spaces for people to be seen and heard and to tell their story. Super simple. But it wasn't kind of celebrities that I was working with or sort of people who were very used to that. It was very ordinary people who often had never been invited to tell their story before. So there was something that I became aware of in the room that was like deep medicine, which was as the person was telling their story, they were experiencing some level of healing, even if they didn't have the language for it. And I, as the interviewer, and everyone else in the room and the crew was also experiencing some sort of level of healing, although they might have not had the language for it. And I became fascinated about what happens when we sit in a space with another and both of us experience some sort of healing through hearing a authentic story, vulnerably told in a safe environment. And so I did that and became more and more and more interested in the potential of that kind of space for healing in a community context. And at that time, I didn't know anything about circles. And I was on my own journey with healing and, you know, inner work, and had trained in all sorts of different modalities. But that's how I came to circle through holding this curiosity of what would happen if I brought this work that I do in a documentary space into a community context. And I created a circle, and it kind of went from there, that medicine of story, both for the person who shares and the person who hears it.
I absolutely love everything about what you've just shared. And there's so many threads I could pull on here, but just feeling into it. It's like this sense, I love how that kind of unconventionality of the story, because it's just that magic of like that always being there as your gift, but being woven into even like I call it like mundane, but like mainstream is what I'm really speaking to. Is like this kind of medicine being brought in a very mainstream way, and I think that's actually a really good point, because a lot of people think that we have to be, you know, all witchy and woo and like, and actually we can bring our medicine as being a remedy into the mainstream. So there's that. But I think what I wanted to pull out as well was the piece around like this just being the most gorgeous example of people being remedies, because that's kind of something I often talk to, is how we each have our own unique gift, and often that is found in storytelling. So what I'm hearing in what you shared was like these people were being remedies for the people that they were telling the stories to, and I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more to that, because that feels really juicy.
Yeah, there's so much to say there. And I think that one thing that I discovered, which felt like sort of a remedy for all of humanity, is a bit grand to say that, but I found that every single person, no matter who they were, no matter what background they were from, no matter what life they lived, would have a story to tell that would make your jaw drop, that would make your heart soften, that would make you feel more connected to humanity. And I think that what I found through each person's story that I heard, and I literally sat down hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times to listen to people, is that no matter what the tale that they were telling, there was something universal to be found in it for each of us. And so that particular person would carry their unique message, their unique remedy. And regardless of whether or not I related to them on the outside, I would take something that I could apply to my own life. And it just felt like this. It feels like in really allowing ourselves to hear the stories of one another, we can unlock this deep sense of compassion for both ourselves and for the other person and what it means to be human. Like, we need to get back to that humanity, that sense that we are more similar than we are different. And that was what I became fascinated by, and the sort of medicine that I saw in that space.
I love that. There's something in that as well, because I think the witch can often feel so different, and yet it's interesting you use the word similar, because when I talk about the people as remedies, my background's in homeopathy, and so I bring a lot of the universal healing laws into this work from that. And one of the main universal healing laws is the laws of similars, like cures like. And so what you're saying totally mirrors like what how I experience is that in essence there was like something the same that was activating something within you listening to the story that became medicine for you. And of course, we're talking kind of about archetypes here as well in terms of stories. And I think you do work with archetypal stuff now, I believe, or maybe not. I think I felt like an archetypal feeling to some of your emails, I think. But in essence, we're talking about story as medicine. And yeah, I just love everything about that, because my worldview, and I know I'm here to talk about your worldview, so I don't want to like hijack that, but so much of what you're saying is resonating, is that for healing to happen, like, we need to be able to express, and suppression is what causes disease, is my worldview. So I'm wondering if there's anything around that sparks any threads for you.
Yes. And I'm just thinking where to begin with this. I think the first thing to say is I don't formally work with archetypes in the way that you do. However, what I found, it might be worth me telling the story of how Sister Stories came about, because it was really interesting. And it speaks to something that you've just mentioned, which is that I did not know what circles were. And I was recovering from brain surgery, whole of the story, and in my recovery period. And I was walking along this country path, and the name Sister Stories and the format of the circle dropped into my brain without knowing anything about the lineage of circle or how it works. And so I took that and worked with it. And over the years of studying the practice, realized that it is archetypal, what I'm doing. And it's almost like in that moment, I'd accessed something universal and ancient without trying to access it. So archetypal in that sense, I find that, I mean, it's one of the most magical things that's ever happened to me. And I've forgotten the other question that you asked, forgive me. I went down
I think it was just I was just asking you if anything kind of sparked in that. I'm trying to remember what I said now. Just about archetypal, the archetypes. I can't remember either. Oh, expression. I think it was about expression and being healing rather than suppression. Suppression being what causes disease was what I was talking about.
Yes. So one of the things that I find so compelling about circle, and it's one of the reasons that I try and spread it as a practice as much as possible and encourage people to sit in circles and both facilitate circles, is that many of us have been raised in a world where we learn to suppress our expression, particularly as women. You know, we have grown up in the patriarchy, we've grown up in a capitalistic world where we have to conform. There are so many ways in which we are told how we should be, where we are limited in the ways that we can move through the world. And what happens in circle space is I often think it's like a little incubator for finding the self. We get to walk through a door where the agreements of everyone there is that we will see each other, we'll hear each other. We won't express judgment, and we will truly hold that person in their full expression. Like a room where every single person's agreed to that. And so what I find that people get to do, and I'm always interested in people who have quieter voices, people who find it harder to express, we get to take steps towards expressing ourselves, circle by circle by circle, share by share by share, where we can more fully step into our own expression. And, you know, that can have a huge impact on us individually, but I think it has a huge impact collectively as well. You know, I think that as women, there is a massive need in our times for activism, but not everybody is gifted with either the sort of personality or the upbringing where they feel comfortable expressing an activist principle. And I actually think that Circle is a place that we can do that as well. It's a place where I've sort of found my gentle activist voice, and that I think the individual and the collective impact of expression in those safer spaces can be huge.
I love that. There's so much here for the listener for Secret Witch, because I know certainly my own journey as well has been that of feeling like I had no voice. I remember being in Circle. It was actually a yoga training, and we had an opening circle. I remember just being invited to share something, and this was years ago. But like I remember just being like, oh, I literally can't speak like this. And so I know what you're saying as well in my own kind of embodied experience is like the healing transformation of Circle is huge. Let me just feel into any questions there, because I think there's also what comes up is this sense of like fear for the Secret Witch. I think one of the things that the Secret Witch, being secret, is she's so used to hiding. And so often women who are listening to this can be so called to sisterhood, like they feel in their cells, like a bit like you're describing, like there was this calling to Circle and to sisterhood, and then they can kind of like feel all the fear of like, well, okay, then I've got to be vulnerable, I've got to be seen, I've got to share my voice, you know, I might be judged. It just feels so vulnerable. It feels, and it can feel terrifying. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that from that perspective of them feeling terrified. What would you say to them?
I mean, I've sat at this point with thousands of women I keep bumbling my words. I'll start again. I have sat at this point with thousands of women in Circle, and that fear is almost universal. Even in the most externally seemingly confident people, there is something about the rich possibility of the space. It's like, wow, we get to be vulnerable. We get to speak truthfully. We get to listen to others' internal worlds in a way that we wouldn't ever normally do in person. And yet I find that there's sort of two fears that come up. And from what I know about your Secret Witch work, I think perhaps both of them will resonate.
Yeah.
The first is the one that you just spoke to, which is that fear of individual expression, where our conditioning and our sense of what is okay and safe to express, it's like it all can fall down upon us and feel like prevent us from sharing our voices in an authentic way. And often we won't know why that is. And it's almost like a nameless paralysis that can happen. And I go through it again and again. And the only way that I have found to sort of work with that and counter that is through the experiment of showing up. What would it be like to try sharing my voice this time? What would it be like to step into the space and just share a little bit of something that feels vulnerable? What would it be like to name to the room that I'm feeling uncomfortable? And as facilitators, helping that process. So there's that aspect.
I love what you said there. Sorry to interrupt, just that kind of naming of the vulnerability. Like, even I often say this when I'm holding Circle myself, is like, if we can just name what's showing up for us, like if we don't share anything, but just naming, I feel too vulnerable, like there's medicine in that. It's like so healing, because everybody is feeling that as well.
100%. And from a facilitation point of view, I think it's one of the most valuable things you can do for a group. In my first Circle, I was in the chair of facilitator without feeling any desire to lead. I just wanted to gather. And I think there's a different energy to those two things. and I didn't want it to be a top-down experience. But one of the things that happened was I wasn't someone who was used to sharing their voice in a room with people's eyes on them. And as I opened the space, my voice was shaking. And I had to say to the group, you might hear that it's really vulnerable and tender for me to share my voice. You can probably hear that it's shaking. And I just want to say that some of you might feel like that too. What would it be like for us to spend this evening together, even when we feel this way, to just try? And that was like one of my first ever invitations. And I think that the idea that we as facilitators need to embody some sort of leadership quality that is aspirational or is this top-down patriarchal model, that's not what I'm into. I think that the more we can be, the more of a permission slip we are to our groups.
I love that so much because there's such an image of like having to be perfect as well. And this is something I've been journeying with recently and for a long time, but like this sense of like, as a healer, it's often kind of projected onto us, or we even can take on this role of like, we have to know the way, we have to be right. And like people are kind of almost like there's a sense of like people looking at us because of how we've been trained to interact with healers as if they have all the power, you know, the way we interact with doctors as if they have all the power. And actually, it's about coming home to see that we have the medicine inside us. Like we are the remedy, not other people. And so I love that from what you just shared around that point of view of like, as a facilitator, we're not right. Like we're not up here and everybody's down here. Like we're here with you, sharing from the same level of vulnerability. And yes, we might have kind of had more journeys with what we're doing, or you know, more experience, but still, like we still feel the same vulnerabilities in showing up. So I love what you're sharing there around like this piece around like rightness and wrongness, which I think is this theme that can come up from the secret witch. She's often learned, and for me myself, I've often learned like we're wrong, we're different, you know, as witches. I don't know if anything comes up there.
It does, and I want to speak to that in a minute, but there's just one more piece that I feel like it's really worth naming, that
Yes.
because of the way that the world that we've grown up in, there is this idea of who you need to be to lead something or to lead a group. And the possibility and the potential of circle, and what I love inviting women into who want to offer circles to their community, is this mindset shift between needing to be a leader and being a guardian or a steward of a space. You know, you are not there to get it right. You are not there to be a guru. You are not there to be, again, to use that word, aspirational. Like all you need to do is to have this role of gentle stewardship, which means responsibly creating the space, which means being the gentle sort that, you know, having this holding quality and a robustness to the container you're creating, and being fully human at the same time. And that's not easy.
Yes.
No. And I think that, you know, the other piece I was going to speak to you about, the sort of secret witch piece, is it's really interesting. So in Sister Stories, the format that I teach is secular. Like it's not a spiritual circle. And, you know, I offer circles in this model, and I teach facilitators to offer circles in this model. And what comes up so strongly for almost everybody is this bone deep fear of persecution for holding circle space. That it's like somehow, you know, that it's witchy, that it's spiritual, that it's sort of, there's an illicit quality that could get us in trouble, that we're doing something weird, that we're doing something woo. And, you know, although the space feels deeply spiritual, if you were to look at what we do, it's actually deeply human. And it just shows how deep that witch wound goes. That basically gathering women in a circle by candlelight feels like, I mean, I've got over it now because I've done so many. But I literally felt like someone was going to come to my door and say, what are you doing? This is all wrong. On a very visceral level.
Yeah, I love that so much. I think so many of the listeners will resonate with that piece about, that kind of sense of like, I'm going to be burned at the stake if I do this. And so I love there's that kind of very human aspects, and all of that feels so permission giving, both for people, and we talked about this kind of distinction, both for people who are wanting just to heal themselves and also for people who are wanting to begin to hold circle for others. And I think that kind of journey for me is like one and the same. Like we kind of become healers by living into, like getting used to going to circle and, you know, being in the space ourselves and kind of learning to share in that way. It has us kind of be able to express our medicine is my feeling.
I just share one more
Yeah,
kind of
please
thing
do.
about, we talked about, you know, we've talked quite a lot about the possibility and richness that comes with sharing in circle space. But one of the things that I think doesn't get talked about enough is the courage that it takes to really listen. And, you know, I know you talk a lot about sisterhood, and I was saying to you before we started recording, I was listening to one of your episodes about sisterhood and felt like there's so much synergy between our work. And what it can be easy to forget is that when we place ourselves in a circle type space or in a sisterhood community, we are voluntarily putting ourselves in the position where we need to learn to listen deeply and hold the complex stories of others. And that can activate all sorts of stuff within us. It can activate, I mean, we can imagine, but just to list out some of them, a feeling of not enoughness, comparison, jealousy, you know, just that sense of being triggered, not liking someone can come up. You know, all of these, again, deeply human feelings. And a part of the medicine of circle that isn't talked about enough is what it can do when we commit to the practice of listening in that way, in terms of how we relate to other human beings. And I think that that is actually one of the most important ways in which this work can heal our world. When we
love that.
critical mass of people who've learned to listen, to tolerate the difference of others and be with, like, oh, she said something, I just really felt something, and I'm just with it. And it doesn't mean anything about her, and it doesn't mean anything about me. That's actually where some of the richest work is done.
I love that you share that, because that was on my list of questions to ask in a different way, but it kind of speaks to the same thing, because, you know, I often talk about sisterhood as a mirror for our triggers and like how we can kind of help confront and learn more about ourselves and more about kind of who we are and what's kind of our wounds and meeting our own inner little girl. And of course, with that, reclaiming our gifts and reclaiming, you know, what's gold for us in that. And I think one of the things, and this can sound like a strange question, but I think it's really talking to what you're speaking to there, is like we've talked about the power of like being able to express and not be judged. And also, I'm all for kind of cultivating that space. And also there's a necessity for that full expression. And there's also kind of like a fine line between kind of sharing our struggles and kind of getting stuck in those wounds. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that, if you're seeing kind of what I'm pointing to. It's like, what guidance would we give to women who kind of feel caught in those triggers and stories? Does that make sense?
Yeah, feel caught in triggers and stories in relation to their own story, or in relation to what they're hearing?
Yeah, I guess what I'm speaking to is I've often been to circle where maybe it's almost like and this isn't quite the energetic that I mean, but it's almost a sense of like we come here and we just moan.
Yeah.
And what I guess I'm referring to is like as we kind of are able to own and acknowledge what our triggers in response to the group, in response to, you know, whatever is going on for us, there's almost like a place of power that we can also be guided to. Does that make sense?
Yeah. One thing that came up, and this isn't directly what you asked, but it came up strongly when you were talking about sort of getting stuck in our own stories and sort of turning up and moaning potentially about the same thing. You know, circle is an ancient practice, and it has been kept alive by many different communities. And there's an Indigenous community in which, in circle, you are only allowed to tell your story 3 times, the same story. And after that, the rest of the circle will turn their back to say, this is complete. And so there is an embodied signal of like, okay, it's time to move beyond that story that you're stuck in. The expression is important, but so is moving through it. And I think that you're right, there's this fine line between having the space to share what's alive and what's true for us, and also using the telling as a way to move through and beyond the story.
Mm.
I
Mm.
trained quite a few years ago in narrative therapy, and one of the things that you do in that model is you share your story as medicine, and you basically go through a process where you have to join the dots of your story together in a different way to restory your life and create a more life-giving narrative than the one that you're
Mm.
doing. And circle can be a place to do that,
Yeah.
that piece. And then
I
in
love
terms of,
that. I
sorry,
was
go
just
on.
going to say, I was just trying to remember what it was in the previous point that sparked me to ask that question. I think it's about sisters acting as mirrors. And so I think one of the things that I find, and I'd be interested to know what you feel about that, is that that's that kind of place of listening and also maybe offering reflection, and how you find that dance in circle. Is there a space for reflection in circle?
Not in the circles that I hold.
Mm.
And there are lots of different people who do it differently. And the reason for that is that in the circles that I hold, there is no reflection. You speak your stories into the fire.
Mm.
And that's sort of a practice from the lineage circle that I work in. You speak your stories into the fire and you don't get any response or any reflection, which is really countercultural and feels really weird because everyone's like, what? What? So I don't share back to this person. But in that comes the power of being liberated from something that we experience so much in everyday life, which is advice or
Yes,
reflection,
I love that.
unsolicited, you
Mm.
know. And so, to speak to your earlier question about kind of the triggers that come up, what we get to do when we sit in the circle space again and again and have that experience of, other women mirroring our triggers, is that there isn't a spoken reaction that we can have in the model that I work in. And
Mm.
so we don't express anything verbally. We must sit with what arises within us,
Mm.
learn to hold it with compassion. And then when you do that again and again, then you find that those triggers don't come up as strongly and you
Mm.
haven't even done anything.
I love that. I
You
love
just
that. So
listen.
there's a sense of like welcoming and having compassion for and loving these kind of aspects of ourselves that are coming up in terms of triggers. It's almost like for me, I see those as like remedy states. So we all have like a different remedy states and that we go into throughout life, and maybe as a young child where we've learned something that then kind of gets kind of stored away. And I call that like a remedy state. So in essence, what I'm hearing is the triggers become these kind of remedy states that come up, and we learn to hold them with love and compassion, which kind of dissolves them and helps kind of helps us reclaim that lost part of ourselves, is kind of how I would name that. um
The way of putting it, yeah.
yeah, what I love about what you said though is about the piece about not having advice, because that is something that I again often talk to in circle, and is something that I make a clear distinction between. So in our circles we do have reflection, but only if somebody wants it, only if somebody's kind of wanting to receive that. But what I make a distinction between is advice versus reflection, and I think there's a very different way of holding both of those. Like advice would be, I think you should do this. Reflection would be, oh, I'm noticing this coming up for me. Like how, does that bring anything alive for you? There's just like kind of open dialogue about what's coming up for other people. And there's kind of, again, like there's no right or wrong in how we choose to hold that. But I loved what you said about advice, because I think advice can be so counterproductive, for want of a better word, to us being in our own experience and our own wisdom.
Yeah, exactly. They
Mhm.
take us outside ourselves into someone else's perspective, and actually what we need is to sit with our own story.
Yeah, yeah. And that feels to me to be like the difference of the nuance of reflection. Um, yeah, there was something else that was you were speaking to, and I think it was about courage. I love that piece about the courage to listen. Like it's almost like courage is required for whatever we do in circle. It's like both sharing our voice and listening. Mm. I'm just wondering. Let me just see where else I wanted to go, because there's so many questions that I had. I think I don't know if we've already spoken to this, but the sense of like being too much or not enough can also come up. I suspect. Is there anything that you'd have to say around that, and particularly like that sense of like being inadequate? Actually, there is a question from the group, which which kind of feels linked to this. Let me just find it. This is from our Secret Witch group because I asked for questions. I thought this is a really good one. So, but I'm so looking forward to hearing your conversation with Gemma. I love her gentle approach, which makes holding a circle seem possible. I guess my question would be around my biggest fear, which is coping with nerves and becoming speechless, blank, etc. Eek, my fear of losing love if I can't add value. So this is her as a practitioner who would be entering into holding circle.
My fear of losing love if I can't add value. What a beautiful way to put it, and what a fear to be holding. I really feel that in my body when you shared those words, and I think that the path of holding circle isn't always easy because, and again, it depends what model you use, but in the model that I work with, the role of the facilitator is, it almost looks sometimes like you're doing nothing at all. So in a circle that gathers once, you literally, you'd gather the group, you do everything beforehand, you would have some sort of opening, some sort of meditation, share the guidelines, and one opening question that the group sits with then for the next 90 minutes, 2 hours. That is it. And the reason that I use that model is that there's such power in the simplicity. And the reason that I teach that model and spend so much time with my facilitators is that it is an access point to our deepest fears. Because what we don't do in the circle is deliver tangible value. In the sense that you couldn't say, by the end of this circle, you will experience X, Y, and Z. And the shift that I would encourage the person to make who asks that question is, I always talk about circle, and I frame this up front when someone is coming to my space, is this isn't an outcome-based experience. Sorry, let me say that again. This isn't an outcome-based practice. It's an experience-based practice. So the medicine of the space is that we don't know what's going to happen there. We don't know. And when you can, again, coming back to naming things that scare you as a facilitator, when you can liberate yourself from the idea that you need to do anything in particular or drive a particular outcome, or that the circle won't be a success if you haven't delivered value in the way that you think you should, and you can sit in the simplicity of the space itself being enough. You're this steward. You're the steward. You gather the group. That's it. That is enough in itself. And when I train women, we spend about 1/3 of the, no, less, 1/4 of the time talking about what you actually do in facilitation, and 3/4 of the time talking about fears such as that, because it's huge. The only way through it is to really, see if you can do this really countercultural thing of liberating yourself from the idea that you are responsible for the outcome and that you'll only be loved if you deliver that.
Yeah, I love that. Another way that I would say is what you're speaking to is like, the more we can just show up in our authenticity and be our remedy. Like ultimately, when I'm talking about being our remedy, people get jumped to like, oh, I've got to do something to be my remedy. And it's like, no, we just express our truth. And let that be medicine and hold space for others to then express theirs and see what's reflected in that even for them.
Sounds like you're saying remedy isn't something that we do, but it's something that we are.
Yes, exactly.
Again, when we can start to embody that feeling, it is a liberation. Oh my God, we're exhausted by all the things that we need to do. And you just put it in a beautiful, beautiful way.
I love that. I love that we arrived at that distinction from that question, because it feels so important. Because again, we're taught we have to fix, we have to do something, we have to change. And really, we're talking about unleashing and liberating our voices, our true expression, our authenticity. And of course, that's terrifying. So the more things that we could put that we have to do before we actually do that and be that is probably kind of also like a mechanism of protecting that part from being expressed as well. I'm going off on a tangent now. I think the other thing I wanted to speak to is this part around, because I know we've spoken to like the power of like reclaiming our power in circle, But I think, and we talked, to moaning, which isn't really a kind of a phrase that lands with me for what I was trying to describe, but let's go with it because it feels like it's easily understandable. I think there's also something in that to explore around how when we go to share, if we are experiencing struggle, because this is something that can come up for women that I've worked with, is often we can not share our struggles because we feel like it might take away from the positive energy of the group or something along those lines. And I think it'd be helpful here to hear how you feel about people sharing their darkness.
The best way that I can answer that is that to do anything other than to embrace our full spectrum of humanity would be a disservice to the space and a disservice to the women in it. And I also really recognize that feeling of being like, oh, I'm always the one who is sharing the heavy stuff. And I think that the truth is that we cannot bypass the truth of our experience if we want to live a meaningful, connected life. We just can't. It's just not, it's important that we embrace all facets of our humanity. And I think that there are ways as a facilitator that you can sort of support the person to either land in that space and the depth of the struggle, or to find a different way in to the conversation, that circle. But I think that we often feel like we need to bypass our humanity, and I believe that circles the space to reclaim our humanity.
I agree. And that's why the witch really speaks to me, because like she symbolizes the darkness being liberated. And I think that's, ties into that fear of persecution, like persecution for being just that, in that authenticity and the raw, messy wildness that we kind of feel like we have to hide and that we shame in the world, because that's just not what we talk about in the mainstream.
No, and also it feels like, one of the things that feels important to say about the space is that if someone's coming and always finding them in that space, it might be that the circle can only hold so much, and that there's also an additional amount of support needed outside. Like, it's okay for circle not to be able to hold everything. Sometimes there are times when more therapeutic support is needed in addition to the holding of the space. So I think I think what you said is absolutely right about the witch and the darkness and going there and making sure that our containers can hold the bigness of
I love that. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that makes so much sense to me too. There was something around like safety and circles, safety and the safe space of circle that I wanted to ask you about, because I think there's also been a dance that I've had particularly around like creating it as a safe space, but also giving the power back to people to create and cultivate their own inner safety, if that makes sense. And I'm wondering if there's anything to speak to around the safety of circle.
Yes. So for many years, many of us would talk about creating safe spaces, and I did it too. And in my sort of learning over the years, particularly through like interest in social justice facilitation, I've come to realize that no space can ever truly be safe. And so there isn't actually such a thing as a safe space, because what feels safe to me won't feel safe to you. And we will have an intersection of all sorts of lived experience and cultural backgrounds. And, we could go on where someone's individual perception of safety is very different to the next person, the next person. So we can't create safe space. What we can do is create the conditions in which there is a really robust set of expectations and agreements about what might happen in the space. And so, like if you're coming to one of my circles, for example, that aren't themed, you could hear anything. And part of stepping into that space is knowing I might be exposed to something which is a trigger for me because I've had this incident happen in my life and it's tender and raw and vulnerable. And that's part of the opportunity and also the risk of stepping into the space. And so I think that one of the things that is important is a degree of self-responsibility when stepping in, that we are opening ourselves to the inner worlds of others, that might trigger things within us, and do we have the desire or the capacity to hold that trigger really gently with vulnerability,
I
and
love
see
that.
what happens when we're exposed to it as opposed to fierce protection.
Yeah. Because, circle is medicine, as you said, people are remedies. So it's like almost like choosing consciously into that and allowing ourselves to provide what we need to be able to enter that, which is kind of, I love what you said there about it not being a safe space. In terms of like, that's very much my own worldview as well, is that it's about us learning to consciously choose into receiving medicine and beginning to cultivate our own sense of safety to be able to be in that space, if that makes sense. I love that. There was something around the power of unconditional love as well, that I wanted to ask you about. Like, I guess, how do we cultivate that within Circle? And do we?
Tell me more about that. That's a beautiful question, and I've never thought about it
Mm.
in this way. Wow,
Well, I
tell me.
guess one of the things that makes me think of it is the way that often people, if we've kind of wanted to share our story, we may have shared it somewhere where it has been judged or it has been um, felt not safe to share it. And I guess part of the beauty that I see of Circle is that we're met with no judgment, with all is welcome. And so that's that kind of piece around that unconditional love feels to me to be part of the magic. And so I just wondered if there was something around that to speak to.
Oh my God, it's gorgeous the way you put that. I've never
Mm.
thought of it in terms of unconditional love. But as I heard you describe it just then, what came up for me was almost, if we've got the pieces right in the lead up to the circle, so everyone knows what they're stepping into, there's been a really clear invitation, all that groundwork is set to make the space as safe as possible, given what you just said about safe spaces not existing, then it's almost like there is a field around the space of this acceptance and unconditional love because we've all stepped into the intention that we will hold that frequency for everyone else, and that we will I almost think that it's like we all sort of come in with our palms upturned, like to the air, waiting for the stories to land, and we each hold them in our hearts, even if we feel triggered, even if there are things that come up with ourselves. That's the sort of group agreement, and that's where I think that's where the healing lies, is that we've all agreed, which is why you never want anyone in your space who doesn't know what they're signing up to, because that's where the problems arise.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like an energetic field of unconditional love, and that being witnessed in that way can unlock such deep healing within us, especially when we haven't experienced that elsewhere, especially when we've been told, that we're wrong, or that we're not enough, or that we're too much, or that our stories don't matter, or people haven't really heard us. That's where it lies. So yeah, that's beautiful. I love that.
I love that. Yeah. And I often try and reflect on each guest and what remedy they're serving it through the podcast. Because often I see that when I'm interviewing guests, they're providing their remedy through sharing their story as well. So I was just contemplating like whether Rosa or the rose was kind of your remedy in the way that I would see it as an archetypal thing. It's like that deep kind of sense of unconditional love that feels to be within that space. So yeah, I love that. Let me just see if there's any other questions. I don't know if anything else pops out of you, pops out at you there.
There was something that was going to say and I forgot. Oh, I think that I'm speaking more to the facilitation piece now than the attending circle piece, but you can be a really beautiful facilitator if you can embody being a space of permission for your group. Like, I remember I was once working with a coach and she said, "What are you a space for?" I thought, "Oh, I don't know quite what you mean." And I sat with it and I found myself saying, "I'm a space of permission." Because I'm not perfect. I'm not polished. I'm not, I'm nervous. I am shy. And I've always been open about that from day one. And people listen to me on something like this and think you've got it all together. And actually, I hold all of those lack of confidences. And so part of the medicine that I have learned to bring and encourage others to bring is like how who you are is permission for others. And I have, women sitting with me from like the ages of late teens to 80, and each person embodies their permission in a different way. And so it starts with a facilitator, and then as you enter the space, when you're a participant, your story is permission to everyone else.
Yeah.
And like when we surround ourselves in that energy in that space again and again and again, then that permission flows into all other areas of our life. And my God, what a difference that makes when we're like, oh,
Mm.
know that it's safe to be me.
Yeah. Ooh, yes. Safe to be me. I love that. Yeah. So many people will find that permission. I know that from listening. There was something that just came then. I think I was going to ask if there was any particular transformation story that that kind of stands out to you through your years of circle holding and facilitation that feels aligned to share.
I don't think I can speak to a particular one today, but I think that what I can do is speak to sort of the general thing that's
Yes.
astounded me, which is sometimes when I'm alone at night and I'm thinking, how did I end up here where this is my entire career? Like, what am I just mad thinking that this space is so important? And then I sit in the space and again and again and again, I see women transformed by the what the space does for them in terms of this sense of self-expression, self-connection. Permission, I think, is one of the key words. And everyone who sits in the space with me over a long period of time finds that. And that's what I think is the most amazing transformation. And whenever I speak to friends who are, hold circle as well, they all say the same thing. It's like we all find a way to help people find even the most gentle transformation in this connection to self that there is, and developing real self-compassion, not just like the idea of self-compassion, like embodied self-compassion. Not just me that feels this way.
Yeah.
I expressed my voice and it was okay. I was heard, I was held, and the confidence that comes with that over time. I find it.
I love that. Yeah, that's so gorgeous. And yeah, it feels like this beautiful embodiment is what you're inviting people into, like the actual embodiment of transformation, of expressing ourselves. Yeah, that's so magical. I'd love to know, for people who are thinking, well, yeah, I love this, like, what if people are scared to enter sisterhood? Like, what would you invite listeners to do, like, to begin to harness that for their own healing journey?
Step to step, scared to step into sisterhood. I think not letting fear to be a barrier if you feel the calling to move in that direction. And so often we think that fear needs to not exist for something to be true.
Yeah, that was part of my question. So do we have to feel ready to step in?
I still don't feel ready sometimes. Like, I think that when we can acknowledge fear and almost like give it really loving embrace and being like, hi, you're welcome here. Liz Gilbert always talks about this idea of fear being a companion on our journey. She talks about it in relation to creativity, but like, you're there. You're in the car with me. That's fine. She's like, you can sit there, you can do your thing. You can't touch the radio, you can't read the map, and you certainly can't drive.
Yeah,
maybe that's really helpful. But I used to think that I needed to have no fear to step into spaces that I felt drawn to, and actually often now I know that when that fear is there, there's something that can be moved and healed within myself. And so I think just taking the first gentle step, it doesn't need to be a big leap, it doesn't need to be like, throwing yourself into the middle of the circle of sisterhood, being like, I'm here, guys. Just a gentle step forward that moves you the direction you feel drawn to without needing to be fearless.
I love that so much. And particularly the piece about the inner dialogue. It's almost like this inner dialogue with our scared parts of being like, you know what, it's okay. You're safe. Like we can take that next tiny little step and just keep taking the next and the next, and following those kind of breadcrumbs. That feels really gorgeous. Beautiful. Anything, and I suppose this is probably the same, but like for those who are healer witches, any advice to them on, as they take their first tender steps into holding space?
I think that the most important thing, well, we've sort of touched on it before, but is giving yourself the permission to bring your authenticity to the space, because it's your authenticity that will be the thing that guides it. And so I often see people thinking like, oh, I want to hold a circle. And I know that lots of people hold circle spaces for real depth and vulnerability. That's what I should do. But actually, they feel drawn, and their sort of medicine, and maybe you would say remedy, I don't know, is they actually want to create spaces for joy and celebration. And so if that's the case, you don't need to do what lots of other people do. Move in the direction that feels most authentic to you and bring your authentic expression to the space as fully as you can, because that's when people will feel safe themselves. It's not a performance. You're not a guru. You don't need to be anyone in particular. You just need to bring your humanity, and that's permission for others. And the more human you are within appropriate like boundaries, the more the space will soften and open up and be a beautiful space for.
I love that so much. Just speaking to authenticity, like how did you find, because obviously when you started, you were holding space for other people's stories. Like how did you journey into like allowing your authentic self to shine through?
I think that it wasn't a journey because my authenticity was in nerves. So when I was a filmmaker, there wasn't, where the authenticity lay was allowing my natural curiosity to lead.
Yes.
And bringing my humanity as a person, not just like, here's my list of questions that I have to follow and that someone senior has signed up, like someone else in the office has signed off or whatever. Just being like, that was the authenticity there. And then in Circle, it had to be there from day one, because I was like, oh, my voice is shaking. I need to tell everyone my voice is shaking.
Yeah.
And it has felt like the only way that I can do this is to let myself be authentic. So it's become inextricable for me. I can't actually separate the two, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It makes perfect sense. And I guess, did you struggle with the fear of that? I mean, you talked about your voice shaking, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think that I remember being really early on and seeing all of these women's circles on Instagram, and everyone looked so fancy, and they all had like flowing robes, and they were very aspirational. And I don't want to be aspirational. I just want to be human. And I think that, again, when I liberated myself from that, like, you don't have to have aesthetics don't matter. Being, a top Instagram influencer to hold a space doesn't matter. What matters is the truth of who you are in the space.
Yes. I love that.
And again, that's a liberation.
Yeah. That's gorgeous. I feel so, my heart feels so full hearing that, actually. That just feels like a really gorgeous piece around, like just being who you are, being your truth. Yeah. Gorgeous. Thank you so much. I would love for you to share anything else, if there's anything else that feels like we haven't touched on. And also, how people can find you.
I think you touched on this really early on, and I just want to speak to it explicitly, which is that, you talked about sort of this in the mainstream. And I want, like, my life's mission is to try and play my part in bringing Circle mainstream again. And so, there is such value in it being something that is behind closed doors and has that safety and that secrecy and that sort of witchy element. And I think there are ways for so many of us out there to take the principles of this work into our communities, into our lives, and to spread the power of this space, which at its heart is about connection and compassion and community, because the world really needs it. I mean, it really, really needs many of us going out into the world and doing this. And so part of my mission is to try and make going to Circle as common as yoga class, so that it becomes normalized that we create spaces as a society to be our authentic human selves.
Yeah.
Like, if you imagine, even like 30, 40 years ago, yoga was constrained to the fringes of society, and people have found a way, sort of setting aside any of the complexities around appropriation by the West. Let's just, I use it as an analogy because it's something that was on the fringe of society that has now become normalized, so a corporate boardroom would do it. We can all play our parts in taking this out so it does become normalized and not a thing that activates fear within us, but is accepted once again as part of what it means to be a functioning society.
Yes, I love that so much. What that brings up for me is this sense of like the lost village. And that very much for me, like when I gave birth, I realized like just how disconnected our society had become, because we didn't have, people surrounding us in ancient, in the way ancient worlds did with their kind of the village feel and the support. And so I absolutely felt the truth of what you just shared. Like it feels so vital. And I think also when people identify as being a witch, they can often, like we talked to briefly earlier, like there's this sense of like, oh, I have to be all woo and like magical and dress in a certain way. And like, that sense of like, I have to do things differently. Whereas actually what we're talking about is just being who we are. And that feels so vital in this world where we've learned to be kind of contorted and fit ourselves into that kind of more, I don't know if it's a more masculine structure, but more kind of modern way of society. So I love what you shared there. Yeah.
I'll just say this quickly, but you probably will have heard of this, and perhaps your listeners have too, this idea that in lots of Indigenous societies, physical and mental illness is seen as basically a symptom of a society that's out of balance and a society that is sick. And I was experiencing severe illness last year repeatedly, and I had to try and explain this to my GP. Like, this is because I'm a single mother with 2 children, a society that isn't set up for it.
Yeah.
And, and I'm trying to circle is a huge part of my life, but the rest of society hasn't caught up yet. And I'll explain this to a doctor. But
I've been there many times.
I think that you're right that it has the potential, this work, if each of us play our part in doing it, to be part of genuine societal healing. And I really want everyone to know who's listening to this, who's called to that work, there is a way for you to play your part, even if you don't think you fit the mold in some way, even if that fear is there. And that feels really important to name.
That's so gorgeous. Yeah, so gorgeous. Beautiful. Thank you so much, love. And where can people find out about you and your work so that we can
so I'm on Instagram at Sister Stories UK, and my website where I share a lot of what's going on is sisterstories.co. And I have, I think, the biggest accredited facilitator training in the UK, and I love supporting people in circles, so people can come and do that, or you can just come and sit with me in circle spaces.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Gemma. That was a really gorgeous conversation, and I think so healing on all the levels for everyone. So just beautiful. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. That was a really juicy, gorgeous, loving episode with Gemma. Here are my takeaways. Sister circles are a potent space of healing and permission giving, providing a space for self-discovery, expression, and gentle activism, which can help change the world through compassion, connection, and community. Both in leading and participating in sister circles, being authentically ourselves and acknowledging our vulnerabilities is crucial for creating deep healing. We can often feel a fear of joining a circle of sisters, and if we feel we can't share anything else, simply naming our fears can be so healing in and of itself. Listening is also a vital, courageous act, and it allows people to hold space for each other's complex stories and can activate deep self-illumination. As I always say, people are remedies, and circle allows others to mirror where we need love. As facilitators, we aren't there to get it right or be more advanced. Our role is as a gentle steward, creating and holding space for the group. If you're just starting out, keep it simple and be authentic rather than thinking you have to do more. The medicine is in you expressing your unique, authentic self, aka being your remedy.